now, pure love.
Hello, everyone. I'm Father Dan O'Connell, host of We've Got to Talk, and you're watching Catholic TV, America's Catholic television network.
One of the great gifts that God has given me in my journey is I very seldom ever take anybody personally. And I just ask each of you to reflect, how often do you take someone personally? How often do you let somebody get to you? And in letting go of taking people personally, I'm going to share with you the most important thing I've ever done in my life. Jesus says, unless you're willing to leave mother and father, you cannot be my disciple. Unless we're willing to leave our childhood, we'll never become an adult. And then there's that factor was when we attended history classes. Often the history teacher would say, if we don't understand history, we're going to repeat it. Well, what we're going to talk about today is getting to know our story, understanding why we are the way we are. I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I think this is so important. First of all, if your parents are still alive, or one of them is still alive, do you have the kind of relationship that you'd like to have with them? Are you friends? Or are you closer to your friends than you are to your own parents? Well, what happened to me was that you could think I had my life pretty well together, but then you could watch me enter my parents' home, and I suddenly became a 15-year-old. I spent all my energy trying to please my father, and he spent all his energy telling me how to please him. I'd be sitting there having dinner with my folks, and my dad would say, son, you're eating too fast. Or I'd take him out for a drive, and you'd think I was in driver's ed. And the crazy part of it was I was in my late 40s, and he was in his early 70s. I didn't need a father, and he didn't need a son. We needed to become friends. So I went fishing with him. My dad had a fishing boat up in the Delta near Stockton, 8.5 mile junction. And I go with him on the weekends, hoping that by fishing together, we break down the walls and become friends. But you know what eventually happened? My dad had pushed one of my buttons. See, he knew which buttons to push. He put them there in the first place. My dad could get me angrier faster than anybody in the world. And I'd leave the boat more angry than when I came. And so I realized as my dad got older, he had a lot of serious health issues, that it would have been a tragedy if my dad would have died and we'd never become friends. Because there'd be no other chance to have that kind of a relationship. It'd be over. What I did is I created a 4-step process. In many ways, I look at myself as a spiritual engineer. I create models to solve spiritual problems. You've seen that as an example in many of my talks. And I wanted to create a model to let go of the anger so that I could become friends with my father. I developed this 4-step process I'm going to share with you. I never shared it with my father. He wouldn't have known what I was talking about. But when I suddenly changed, he suddenly changed. You know why? Because he wasn't reacting to my anger anymore. My anger, which I didn't even know I had, always put my dad on edge. I'll never forget, we'd been friends for maybe 4 or 5 months. We used to take a lot of trips together. And one day my dad said to me, son, you used to be so angry at me. And the crazy part of it was I thought he was angry at me. That's the first reason. And I suggest this if any of you have parents alive and you don't have the relationship with them that you'd like. Secondly, suppose your parents have died. You're still carrying this anger system to your serious relationships. Let me give you an example. John and Mary. They've been in our parish for many years. Their families have been. One day they meet and they fall in love. And they come to church on Sunday, and people look at them. If there was ever a marriage made in heaven, it's this couple. Even on their wedding day, they're kneeling at the altar knowing that there's no way they could ever hurt each other. Their marriage is going to be different. Well, they come home the first couple of months, they have a wonderful honeymoon. They come home, they melt into each other's arms. They eat dinner with candlelights and flowers. And they look into each other's eyes and see God's immense love. And they know it's going to be like this for the rest of their marriage. But about 3 months into their marriage, John is working a new job, trying to impress his boss. He suddenly looks at the clock, and it's 6:30, and he's normally home at 5:30. He hasn't even called his wife. So he grabs his coat, dashes for the car, runs through a few red lights, walks into the front door, and he's met with the icy silence and a strained voice. And he starts to explain to his wife that he should have called. She starts yelling and screaming, "We never should have got married. I knew it would never work." And John looks over at Mary. Why is Mary so angry? Well, Mary had a father that she thought always preferred his work over her. She always felt second best to her dad's job. So she saved all this anger from her father. And then when her husband comes home late one night from work, all that anger that she saved from her father, she dumps on her poor husband. Any of you recognize that? You know how I really got into awareness of how important this information is? Oftentimes I'd be counseling a couple trying to get this, for example, the wife to forgive her husband. Till I realized that she wasn't really angry at her husband. She was angry at her father, and her husband was an extension of her father. And so she could never truly forgive her husband until she forgave her father. It's amazing how many women marry a man who's emotionally unavailable, trying to get from him what she couldn't get from her father. It's amazing. But anyway, it's 6 weeks later, and it's Saturday morning, and the sink is busted. And John tells Mary, "I'm going to fix it. I've got to learn how to do these things. I've got to become king of the castle." But Mary says to John, "Please, John, call a plumber. If you don't know what you're doing, call a plumber." John says, "Mary, trust me, trust me." About 10:30, water squirting in all different directions, and they call a plumber. About $1,000 later, it's about 4 PM, they've cleaned up the kitchen. They're sitting at the breakfast table. And Mary starts to say to John, "John, you should have." That's all she gets out. Suddenly his face turns bead red. He starts yelling at her, "Shut up, I don't want to hear another word." Mary looks at John. Why is John so angry? Well, John had a mother that used to always nag him, always tell him how he could do something better. So when she starts to nag him, all the anger that he saved from his mother, he dumps on his poor wife. See, that's why I often tell married couples that you're not marrying each other, you're marrying each other's mother and father. Each person brings their own family anger system into their marriage, and they create a new anger system. Well, if you are married or in a serious relationship and you work this process, you'll discover that things you've been angry at your spouse for years has nothing to do with you, that your spouse would have done it to anybody they married. It's not about you, it's about the family they came from. And if you can let go of the anger system in your marriage, you can reach a whole new level of intimacy. A whole new level of intimacy. So that's the second reason. Here's the third reason. All of us have a committee up in our heads. And the committee tells us how we ought to live and how we should live and how we must live. Usually our parents are sitting on that committee. Now, how does somebody get on our committee? By staying angry at them. We give them power over our lives. You know how we fire somebody from our committee? By forgiving them. Let me give you a good example. I was the oldest son. I've already mentioned that in my family. My dad was much harder on me than anyone else. In the crazy 60s, I used to bring some of my Jesuit friends home and listen to them by the hour. He'd tell them how brilliant they were. I'd say one thing he disagreed with and the roof would come off the house. And my friends used to say to me, "Oh, I wish I had your father. He's so kind, he's so patient, he's so understanding." And I said, "Yeah, but he's not your father." I used to always tell my dad, "Why don't you treat me like you treat everybody else? Why are you so hard on me?" Well, lo and behold, I became the same way. I traveled the road. I listened to people's problems. I'd be so patient, so understanding. But let one member of my family displease me, and I'm right on top of them. I became just like my father. See, my friends, it's a basic truth. The things we do not forgive in our parents are the exact same qualities that we will develop. That's why it's so important to let the voices out of our committee. So the 3 reasons to become friends with your parents, to let go of the anger system in your marriage, to let go of the committee in the head. It's the most important thing I've ever done in my life. Now, I'm going to give you 4 steps, and the understanding will come in the doing. Now, what I'd love you to do is give a whole day to it. It's not a homework assignment. It's kind of a prayer. I really recommend that you find a piece of nature where you can feel close to God. We get away from cell phones and faxes and computers. We just spend some time with you and God. You know, nature is one of the greatest gifts God has given us. In fact, I feel closer to God in nature than I do any church. My week in the Sierras every year is my sacred time. It's my vacation with God. I remember when my dad died, I went up to Desolation Valley near Tahoe and spent 3 nights camping and 4 days just experiencing the loss of my father. Because I was the responsible one. I wrote the article in the newspaper. I called the mortuary. I called the cemetery. I prepared the liturgy. It would have been so easy for me to bury my father and never have grieved, never gone through the process of letting go. I've found nature for me to be a tremendous friend. And you know, my brothers, each of us deserves a piece of nature, our sacred spot. So anyway, all I do, maybe you'll find that you can pray in your church, or maybe they have 24-hour adoration in your church, but whatever you find comfortable. Secondly, I want you to bring some tablets with you. It seems writing is how we go from our heads to our hearts. Marriage Encounter, Engaged Encounter have been very successful because they get people into writing. And when people get into writing, they discover all kinds of things about their heart that they never knew was there. So I have you in beautiful nature. I have you with your tablets. Now the first question is, who do you forgive? Well, if you have some psychological insight and you're married, is your spouse more like your mother, more like your father? If you can figure that out, that's a good person to start with. Now, I'm not married, so I started with my father. And so I'd like to share with you the 4-step process. It's so very simple. The first step is to get in touch with the anger. So what I tell you is what are your buttons? What are the buttons that people push that make you more angry than you should? Now, the way you get in touch with these buttons is, what are the buttons that your spouse pushes? So maybe you won't get 5 or 6, maybe you'll just get a couple. But what I want you to do is just spend some time in prayer and reflection. Just look over your life. What are the things that I get more angry than I should? What does how can my spouse make me more angry than I should? Let me give you some examples of buttons. When I'm talking to someone one-on-one, and they're looking around the room to see who else they can talk to, or they seem bored, I'm going ballistics inside. That's one of my buttons. See, my dad used to drive me to school, and he'd ask me, how's school, how's football? And I'd answer him, and his mind was always preoccupied. He's preoccupied with the business. And I remember thinking as a little boy, my dad doesn't even care. That's one of my buttons. You know, when I talk to teenagers and I ask them, what makes you more angry with your parents than anything else? They always say, when my parents don't listen. They don't worry about them listening to their parents, but when my parents don't listen. That's one of my buttons. Let me give you another button. I had a mission with a little Irish pastor, a little Napoleon. And the church was about 2 miles from where the priest lived. And they lived in a little house with a very narrow garage. So the pastor gave me the keys to his car to drive down to give the mission talk. And he stood there with his arms folded, just waiting for me to scratch his car on the way out. It took me a half hour to back the darn car out. If he hadn't been standing there, I would have backed the car right out, but he made me so nervous. Well, that's one of my buttons. My dad used to stand over me, expect me to make the mistakes, and because he expected me to, I made them. That's one of my buttons. Give you another one. When I have to wait, I get angry when I have to wait. Go to a restaurant, I have to wait, I get angry. You know, I hate to wait. And you know, the truth is, and I'm not kidding you, you may think this is made up, no matter what grocery store I go to, I'm always looking for the shortest line. I always end up in the longest line. They have to go back and check a price in the back of the store, so it takes all the time to go back, and they got to verify a check. By the time I pay for the food, everybody else ahead of me has left the store. It happens every time. I remember before September 11th, 2001, United had too many flights. And I get to the airport, and they say, there's a half-hour wait, we got a flat tire. Then that becomes an hour wait, it becomes a 2-hour wait, and then 3 hours later, we take another plane to the same destination. I wasn't born yesterday. I know they had probably half a flight. They stalled us until they had a full flight. Now, most people handle it very well. They work on their computer or they read their book. Not me. You don't know how many times I've told United, this is the last time I'm ever going to fly with you. You know why? You know why I get so angry? I spent my childhood waiting for my dad to come home from the bars. And whenever I get in touch with the waiting, he gets me in touch with all this anger. So all I want you to do in the first 3 steps is get in touch with the buttons. What are the events that your father did that created these buttons? The second step. Now I want you to write your dad a letter. It's going to be angry. Remember, the people you love the most are the people you can get angriest the most. And the most important people in our lives are our parents. So you're going to write the letter. It's going to start angry. But don't end the letter until it starts turning positive. I don't care if it takes you 40 pages, but eventually it'll turn positive. Now, what you're doing in the second step is you're separating yourself from your father's behavior. So you can do the third step, which is a big step. Now what I want you to do is write down all the very same time that you've done the very same things to the people you love that your dad did to you. Go back to the first list and write down the very same times you've done these very same things to the people you love. I was amazed. I was preoccupied when people I love talked to me. I have stood over people, expected them to make the mistakes they made. I kept people waiting while I was drinking. And here's the important part, my friends. When I was doing this, I realized that all those things I was angry at my father for had nothing to do with me. My dad didn't mean to hurt me. He would have done it to any son he had. You know why I knew that? Because I didn't mean to hurt the people I love. It's about me. It isn't about them. And when my heart saw that, I let go of anger that I've carried ever since I've been a child. That's when I really experienced the love within. That's when I took the longest journey from my head to my heart. That's when I experienced this love within, living in the love of God. That's when I got in touch with my feminine side, my heart. When I moved, there's nothing I did more important that helped me become a whole person. I used to be so overly sensitive, so easily hurt. It was all based in taking my parents personally. As I've told you today, I hardly take anybody personally. Now, it's a wonderful experience because when I let go of this anger is when I became friends with my parents. I'm going to share with you how that happened in my life a little further in our talk. We don't have enough time to share with it this morning or this day. Now, here is the fourth step. Now what I'd like you to do is pick somebody you really trust and respect and share with them the first 3 steps that you've written. It seems when we own something, when we can talk about it, it becomes part of our story. So we need to be able to share it with somebody before we can own it. Now, this is one of my greatest moments in my ministry. I challenge those of you that are married, is what I'd love you to do, or in serious relationship. Each one of you, go apart and work the first 3 steps in your own time. But when both of you have completed the first 3 steps, now what I ask you to do is come together and share it with each other. And you're going to realize that things that you've been angry at each other for years has nothing to do with you. That your spouse would have done it to anybody they married. And you'll be able to let go of your anger system. And you'll reach a whole new level of intimacy. You know, I always, before I ever perform a wedding, I take a couple through this process because I want them to know what's going to happen after they get married. I want them to know what's going to happen. And so they become much more aware of the truth, and it gives them all kinds of wonderful areas that they can talk about that they've never talked about before. In fact, this is the method I use for marriage counseling. It's one of the things that I'm really proud about in my ministry, that I can show you today married couples that are still married, that everybody gave up on the marriage, including themselves. If I can get a couple to enter into this process, if not for the sake of each other because they're so angry at each other, but for the sake of the children, I can show you a whole new relationship that's created when they let go of the anger system. That's why I don't think a separation, all those things don't mean anything unless a person lets go of the anger. In fact, how I do marriage counseling is I never sit down with the couple and ask them to share with me your problems. I never ask them to do that. All I'm going to do is get each other's black books. What I do is I work with each person individually on the first 3 steps. I help them to get in touch with this so that when they finally have finished it, then I bring the 2 together. And so instead of attacking the other, they're sharing with each other their journey, their own story. I believe that any married couples, any couple who's been married, that both were in love with each other in the beginning, I think you can resurrect every couple who have once been in love, if both people are willing. I don't think this works if one or other got married and they weren't in love. They got married because they were pressured into it or they thought it was time to get married. If that is true, see what I think happens. If one or other is not in love, the person that is in love will always feel that the other person doesn't love me as much as I love them. And so they're always going to feel that they're not loved, and they're going to save a lot of anger. And the other person, the person that isn't in love, is build up all this anger because they feel they've been possessed. That's why, for very few marriages ever work where the woman becomes pregnant before the marriage and they get married because of the pregnancy. There's very, very few of those marriages ever work out. And that's what I'm talking about. So my friends, what I'm encouraging you today is this 4-step process. It could be very well the most important thing you've ever done in your life. It's what set me free. I talked earlier about my sexuality and spirituality. I had sexual issues in my life. But when I let go of the anger from my father, I developed a much more balanced sexual life. It's the most important thing I've ever done in my spiritual journey. I had a wonderful relationship with my dad when he died. We were very close friends, and as we traveled this journey, I want to share with you how it happened. I'm very close to my mom today. I lived with her for 18 wonderful years. In fact, people used to think we were husband and wife. We had a restaurant not too long ago, Marcello's, wonderful Italian restaurant in San Francisco. And some couple must have watched this during dinner, because on the way out, they stopped at our table. And they said, "We sure like to have a marriage like yours." You should have seen their shock when I said, "This lady is not my wife, she's my mother." But we have a wonderful time. We had a wonderful years together. She's my dearest friend. But it didn't happen until I let go of the anger. So what happens, my friends, I think it's our whole core anger system that comes from our childhood. And once we encounter that, once we're willing to let that go, we're dealing with our anger at its deepest root. I think it's the most important thing that any of us can ever do. I think it's the greatest step we can take on our spiritual journey. So, my friends, I really encourage you to really make it an effort. I wish I could share with you the many wonderful letters that people have written me, sharing with me the freedom they have received when they let go of the anger from their childhood. God bless you. Have a wonderful journey. And may each of you, be a sign of God's love in the world. May you be a true channel of His love. May you be leaven and bread and light in darkness. God bless you until we meet again.
Stephanie Sconia here. Catch the next and final episode of On a Sacred Note, where we'll wrap up our discussion and hear a musical timeline of Catholic liturgical music throughout the centuries. See you for the culmination of On a Sacred Note, right here on Catholic TV, America's Catholic television network.